think I am live. It is Monday morning, the 28th of August 2023, and I'm reading out of Eyes of HORUS. It is a far memory book by Joan Marshall Grants. She was a writer of her own incarnations. She wrote 7 books. She passed away in 1989. We are here in her life as Ra-Up, which plays in Egypt 3,500 years BC, and we are in the 3rd part of this book now, where Ra-Up explains and describes his life. We are at Neku the goldsmith. The house of Neku the goldsmith was quite close to Hotep-Ra, and he was one of the watchers whom Rodin suggested I should seek out so as to learn of his story. All I knew about him was that he had lost his right hand before coming to the oryx, and now had several pupils to whom he was teaching his craft. When I first saw him, he was sitting cross-legged at the door of his house, showing a boy how to beat gold into thin sheets, which, when they covered a wooden statue, would make it seem as though it were of solid gold. He was younger than I expected, about 40, broad of shoulder, and with a skin paler than is usual among Egyptians. He greeted me by name and then took me into a long room where he kept the things on which he and his pupils were working. He showed me a pectoral in the form of a Horus hawk, its wings inlaid with the 3 colors of carnelian. It was impressively beautiful, and he must have guessed that I was wondering how he could still do such magnificent work when his right arm was cut off below the elbow. For he said, "This is not the work of my hands, though mine was the thought which has become visible. I can no longer make metal obedient to me, but I can still draw designs which show others what I wish them to create, and so transfer to them the skill which I can no longer practice." He took a lamp of unpolished turquoise from the shelf under the window. "Once I could have brought the color out of this stone, but now I tell my pupils how the matrix must be split, so that the fine blue can be freed to make into beads for necklaces. But what does it matter if a man is crippled, so long as the beauty he wished to bring down to earth can find another channel?" Then he opened a painted chest and took from it sheets of papyrus on which were designs for necklaces and bracelets, pectorals and statuettes. It took a long time before my left hand could draw as surely as my right, but now it is no longer difficult for me to take the children of my thoughts on that step of their journey down into form. After he had shown me many more of his treasures, he said, "Come into the other room and I will show you the only thing I've ever made with which I am content. On a shelf above the bedplace there was a small statue of Ptah, the face of white gold, the body of red. In it there was so much of the spirit of the great artificer that it seemed almost as though Ptah himself must have made it. As though if it stretched out a hand, the birds frescoed on the wall would fly out of the window towards the sun, or the blue water lines break into ripples of silver." Perhaps Neku knew I could find no words to express my admiration, for he said, "My hand is gone, but the statue is its son, Ptah, the great artificer, whom one day even little men who must work in metal will know as brother. He made the gold and the silver, the ivory and the sardonyx, lapis and turquoise, jasper and chrysoprase. Even the names sound a prayer in his honor. Amethyst and chalcedony, onyx and ebony. What rich gifts he gave to us who would try to follow him, though we cannot give his life to what we make. My hawks can never spread their wings beyond the span that I allotted them, nor can this silver onyx know the wind, or that twin cobra lose power beyond its coils. Yes, sometimes I think that Ptah will speak to me, not for my skill, but for my love of him." He raised his right arm towards the statue as though to touch it on the foot with a sign of humility. He did touch it, I was sure of that, yet it was with the hand that he had lost. For a moment there was something of kinship between the face of Neku and that bright reflection of Ptah. It seemed they were already in brotherhood, that the hand I could not see was there, the life of Ptah flowing from its fingers. He turned and smiled at me. "You have come to hear why I am a watcher. Rodin told me that I could open my heart to you without reservation." Then, sitting in the doorway, each leaning against one side of the opening to the street, Necker told me his story, and his words were so vivid that as I listened, it was not a road bordered with sycamores that I saw. Women carrying water jars to the well, a laughing boy with a string of fish in his hand, but the scenes through which Necker had lived. My father and his father before him were sculptors to the royal household, and my mother came from a family of Minoan craftsmen. Though she was a foreigner, she brought no household god of her own, but taught me to make my offerings to a statue of Ptah, which had been made by my grandfather. She told me that Ptah and Min and Ra were brothers, and that all artificers were their children. My father taught me his skill, and when he died, though I was only 17, I was appointed chief sculptor to the royal household in his stead. Within 10 years I was a rich man, for I worked quickly, and there were many who would pay a great price to possess something made by Pharaoh's sculpture, even though they could recognize its quality only by the weight of gold dust which they had bartered for it. I did not marry, for to me women were only the shadows of the statues I might make of them, and my household was content under my mother's rule. It pleased Pharaoh that people should see the sign of the royal favor, so I was given an estate larger than that of a minor noble, together with herds, 200 of both large and small cattle, and permission to plant a vineyard as though I held the rank of the keeper of a seal. I also made pectorals and statuettes, and all that I needed for this work was given from the royal treasure house, and whether it was lapis or malachite, silver or ivory, I only had to ask for it. I made lamps and offering vessels for the new temples, but they were of traditional pattern, and I did not know in whose service they would be used. Then one day, it was midsummer and very hot, the stillness of my courtyard was broken by the lowing of oxen and the sound of whips. I was annoyed by the disturbance and left the gallery in which I was working to see what caused the noise. I saw 6 oxen yoked to a wooden sledge under which were long rollers slowly dragging forward a great block of black basalt that was more than 3 times the height of a man. Though I had worked before on blocks nearly as massive, they had always been sent from the quarries, according to my specification, for when Pharaoh had told me for what purpose he wanted a statue, he left the choosing of suitable stone to me. It took several hours and the strength of 40 men before their block was moved into the place where I could work on it. By its proportions I saw that it was intended for a standing figure, instead of, as was usual for Pharaoh, enthroned. Not until the following day did I find in what form Pharaoh had decreed it should be carved, and to receive this news I was summoned, not to the palace, but to the new temple, then still unfinished. Save to make the traditional twice-yearly offering, I had not been to any of the new temples. Having never felt a nearer kinship with the gods through ritual observances, I preferred to pray at dawn and at sunset in the little sanctuary adjoining the gallery in which I worked, where I had placed the statue of Ptah made by my grandfather. I obeyed the summons to the temple immediately, for it came in the name of Pharaoh, and I was his servant. A minor official took me to the sanctuary, not yet completed, and told me to take measurements so that the walls could be built up to the height I judged to be the correct proportion for the statue I was to make. Though the sanctuary was empty, I could see that masons had been working there recently, for the stone dust had not yet been swept from the floor, and the walls were in the process of being covered with thin slabs of basalt, highly polished and uncarved. From the shape of the block which had been brought to me, I thought it probably the statue would be of Ra. Certainly it would not be of Anubis or Hathor, unless it were to be in human form. Just as I had completed my measurements, a man, who by his dress I judged to be the temple overseer, came through the doorway. Such overseers were not priests, though they were responsible for keeping the records of all tributes and the tally of the temple properties. After a formal greeting, he said, "It is hoped that your statue will be ready to receive the first offering offering within 3 months. We are honored that Pharaoh should appoint his finest craftsmen to work for us. But remember that he whom you depict is greater even than Pharaoh, who has the power only on earth. Let your hands be more cunning than they have ever been. Then shall you be as richly rewarded as though you had slaughtered 100 black bulls to set at the dark of the moon. I did not understand him, and though he tried to make a ponderous jest, I said, "This is the first time I ever heard a craftsman bribe with the promise of a curse. If it is Set who will reward me, I would cut off my right hand rather than gain his favor." The man did not answer. Suddenly there was fear in the thick silence of the narrow room, a silence so deep it seemed I must hear the dust motes swirling together in the shaft of sunlight which fell through an opening in the unfinished wall. "It is not Set whom you will carve, but Sekhmet, his female manifestation of boundless power. Sekhmet, the power of the earth, besides whose strength all other gods recoil in impotence." "Is this Pharaoh's order?" "Who else should command Pharaoh's servants? It is at his command that the new temples are being built all over Egypt. I have seen offering vessels made by you in 5 new temples. Are you so bound in the narrow way of your craft that you never learned in whose service they are used? Had I known they should have been made worthy of whom they serve, of misshapen clay from the graves of the unclean coloured, with the entrails of a black pig." I knew the man was coldly angry, yet he stared at me. His eyes were puzzled. "You blaspheme against Set, yet he lets you live? To speak against him is to wait in his caverns, trying to scream for pity with a mouth that has no tongue. He must have use for you to let you live, for his wrath is more terrible upon those who deny the name of Sekhmet, even than on those who deny his name. To speak against Pharaoh is to die. To speak against his gods is to find in death there is no pity." When I reached home, I went straight to my mother's rooms and told her all that had passed between myself and the temple overseer. When I asked her if she thought me right to refuse to work for Sekhmet, whatever the result might be, she seemed surprised that I should have considered any other course than the one I had taken. The last few years had brought her the brittleness of age, yet she seemed undisturbed by this sudden breaking of the quiet routine of her life, and told me calmly that the best we could hope for was exile. "Yes, you will be banished," she said. "You will see, we shall be allowed to depart without being molested. We may even be allowed to take with us some of our possessions, not much, but sufficient for our journey. And if we must travel with poverty as our sole attendant, what does it matter to us when it is your hand that are our treasure? We shall be strangers in a foreign country. We have lived in your father's country. Now we shall go to the island where my father was born. No soil is alien to the children of Ra, for he rules the sky over all the earth." I told the 3 pupils who worked for me that I had incurred the royal displeasure, and that they must return to their home lest they be associated with me in the decree of banishment. They were reluctant to go, and the youngest of them only consented to leave me after I had promised to let him know where I went, so that he could follow me into exile. Though our preparations were made, no word came from Pharaoh for 3 days. My mother urged that she should go while we were still free, but I clung to the hope that rather than lose my skill, Pharaoh would pretend I had not been commanded to work for the temple, or else consider me sufficiently punished by appointing another to be the royal sculptor. Almost I began to convince myself that I should be allowed to stay in Egypt, perhaps even retaining my estate and continue to live amongst my friends and those who worked for me. When the decree came, it was not banishment. It gave me 40 days to make such progress on the statue of Sekhmet as would show it to be my finest work. If this command were not carried out, then I should be banished from all the lands of Egypt, after paying the tribute of my right hand to Sekhmet. After the first reading, I did not understand the full measure of the sentence. My mother's voice was taut as a drawstring. "They will cut off your hand, Neku, before we go into exile. I was a fool to hope that Pharaoh would let you work for another master. It would have been impossible for us to escape, even if we had tried, for there were soldiers posted at every gate of the walls which enclosed the house and its surrounding garden, and each soldier was in sight of the next. I had thought to have many years in which to see my thoughts take shape. Now the work of years must flower. In 40 days, Ptah should be made instead of Sekhmet. I would work in gold, his metal, while the great block of midnight stone stayed dumb. I was going to bury the statue, hoping that in the future, when Set had been overthrown, men would find it and honor it. But on the 21st day, my youngest pupil resumed to me, having passed the guards disguised as a fisher boy. He had heard of Rodan, and had come to tell me that I would find sanctuary in the oryx. It was the same boy who made the pectoral of the hawk you have just seen. I tried to make my mother go with him to the oryx, dressed as a servant who was going to market. It would not have been difficult for her to pass the soldiers, but she would not leave me even though I pleaded with her to go. On the 38th day the statue was finished, and my pupil brought it to the oryx, hidden in the belly of a fish. Neku paused, his eyes dark with the memory of pain. That is nearly the end of my story, the story of how I came to be a watcher. Then he went on. I expected to be summoned to the temple, but on the 40th day the overseer, a priest, and the 12 armed guards came to me. The overseer asked me to see the statue, saying he had heard it was nearly finished. I thought he had said it to mock me. I have never been sure. Later the priest said the plinth on which the unhewn block was standing would be a suitable altar for the sacrifice. The temple guards advanced towards me with straps that were to tie me down. I told them they could save themselves the trouble of this formality. The priest told me to kneel with my right hand held steady on the block. For the last time I flexed my fingers, so swift and supple, so obedient to my thought. As I looked at them, long and smooth and eager to obey me, I knew how a mother would feel if she had to watch her child sacrificed. I saw they made no preparation to stop the bleeding and realized they expected me to die. I felt the force of the blow. It threw me on my side, and through a red haze I could see the fingers of my severed hand slowly unclenched from the edge of the block above me. When they thought I was dying, they let my mother come into the room. Perhaps they did not stay any longer because their order was only for a hand, and Pharaoh is impatient with those who do not carry out his commands exactly. My mother afterwards told me that when she cried out that I was dead, they left the house as fast as their dignity